Welcome to today's CGCC Leaders Roundtable event. My name is Sherry Q, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of CGCC. Today's event will focus on communications and rebuilding trust. It's our great honor to have Mr. Richard Edelman as our special guest today, and moderator David Chenier from Leaders with us here. A high-level audience of CGCC executive board members, as well as other leaders from top American and Chinese companies, are in attendance of today's event. So a brief agenda. CGCC Chairman Mr. Xu Chen will give opening remarks, then followed by a moderated conversation with Mr. Edelman. Then we will open up for Q&A session. If you have a question, please enter in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. David and our team will monitor those throughout the program. You may find more information about the speakers through the link in the chat box at the same time. This event is on the record and open to media. And this event is also currently being live streamed on CGCC YouTube channel and will be able to rewatch after the webinar. So now let's welcome our wonderful chairman, Mr. Xu Chen. Chairman Xu, please.
Thank you, Sherry. Dear CGCC members and friends, good afternoon and welcome to the 6th event of the CGCC Leaders Roundtable program. Data from CGCC's 2021 business survey on Chinese enterprises in the U.S. shows that brand recognition and corporate reputation emerged as one of the primary objectives for Chinese companies' business operations in the U.S. Meanwhile, concerns about the low acceptance of Chinese brands in public opinions rose correspondingly. Over the past years, CGCC has worked to leverage its media, communication, and marketing programs to not only grow and develop our own organization, but to better implement our corporate social responsibilities, especially during the unprecedented times. As the year's Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games will be held in Tokyo, and the winter's ones will be in Beijing next year, I once experienced the 2008 Beijing Games, which left me with deep memories of how the international sponsors emphasize the importance of public relations in their daily operation and management. Today, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Mr. David Chenier, President and Executive Editor of Leaders magazine, as our CGCC Leaders Roundtable moderator, and today's special guest, Mr. Richard Edelman. As the CEO of Edelman, one of the world's largest communications and public relations firms, Mr. Edelman is a leading expert in the PR and communications field, holding extensive experience in branding and reputation management, having led assignments with major corporations, NGOs, and family business. He has advised senior executives through significant disruptions within their organizations and has counseled countries in every region of the world on economic development programs. I believe with extensive experience and deep knowledge of the communications landscape, Mr. Edelman will provide invaluable and enlightening insights, especially to those companies navigating the U.S. China business environment. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Chenier and Mr. Edelman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Xu, as always, and thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Richard, for agreeing to do this and to lend your expertise on this. And I want to go into a number of different issues. And I thought first for CGC's members who might not know the global capabilities and scale of an Edelman and its long history and commitment to China, if you could just start by giving a little bit of that history and talk about the growth and the commitment you've made to China.
So my dad went over in 1990 and acquired a firm that actually opened as Edelman in 1991. And so we've been in China for 30 years. We have 300 people across Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. We've worked with major Chinese companies TikTok, Tencent, and we've done a lot of work with American companies going into China. The chairman talked about the Olympics. We worked with J&J, for instance, on the big Olympics program in 2008. And we work with HP, with Microsoft. We work with drug companies such as Pfizer. So it's a very important operation for us. It's, I think, a number 4 global operation in size. Out of 60 offices, China has 4 of the offices.
When you look, Richard, at Edelman's business, there was a time when people would call it public relations. It went to branding. It went to communications. It has many titles. When you look at what you do today, how do you classify it? And really, is it a compilation of all of those things?
So we try to describe ourselves, David, as a communications firm because we don't just do so-called earned media, which is talking to reporters, getting positive stories in the press. We go direct to the end user of information, oftentimes through a company's own channels on social media. We also sometimes do paid campaigns, for example, for Ajinomoto, the MSG maker. We did a campaign called Take Out Hate, which when the prior administration had a anti-China campaign about, Kung flu, Chinese food sales went down, and we did a campaign with influencers, young people, and said, go buy food at Chinese restaurants because you should fight against hate about Asian Americans. So it was a very important campaign and the sales went up. So I feel proud of that.
When you look at what we've seen today with so much happening around hate and around Asian hate crimes, is there a role for business? And can you talk about the role business and business leaders can play in driving a message around change and around decency?
So we did a study a month ago about racism because we're just about at the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And what we found in that study is that the biggest jump in concerns and fears is among Asian Americans, actually as high now as African Americans, up something like 20, 25 points from a year ago. And in particular, Asian Americans, almost 80% of them look to companies to help to fix the problem, which is get rid of stereotypes, speak up and in your local markets about hate crimes and effective policing and making sure that Asian Americans are treated as they should be. I mean, I live near Chinatown in New York, and I found it stunning, the difference in traffic in Little Italy, 1 block away from Chinatown, meaning people were going back February, March, April to those restaurants in Little Italy, but not to Chinatown. Yeah. So I think we have a lot of work to do on bias against Asian Americans.
Edelman became the leader in research around trust, evaluating trust. You have your trust barometer. Can you talk first about how that whole concept developed? And when you look at this past year and the uncertainty, can you talk about how that has shifted and adjusted trust with some of your more current results?
So, David, we started this in year 2000 because of the battle in Seattle about globalization, when the WTO, World Trade Organization, had its annual meeting and they were stormed by the NGOs. And we thought, gee, who are these NGOs? And they turned out to be the most credible institution ahead of business and ahead of government and media. And so we've continued it for 21 years. And in the past year, it's been really almost chaotic because as of January 2020, NGOs and business were pretty much the most trusted together. Then by May, government ascended to the top position because of COVID, and it was seen as the only one able to deal with a problem of that magnitude, sort of like World War II. And then by the following January, business had emerged as the most, frankly, trusted organization because it was the only one credible, competent, and ethical. And all 3 of those words really matter. And so, and we just come out of the field with a study, in fact, we're releasing it tomorrow, which confirms it's not just business, but it's my employer, David. It's my employer. So Leaders Magazine, you, for all of your people. and Edelman me. And so, but the new expectation, therefore, of business is to step into the gap that exists between trust in business and trust in government. And again, tomorrow we're going to release a study that says across half a dozen topics that you normally associate with government, healthcare, education, the fairness, all those are put where business is more believable than government. So government's at a bit of a low ebb. And so therefore there's big expectations of business leaders to speak up.
If you look at the global nature of the trust barometer, you also look at China as a country.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the results you've seen in the research you'll be releasing when it relates specific to China?
So typically, government in China has been by far the most trusted institution. But over a 10-year period, what's happened is NGOs and business have been rising. Media and government have been at the top, partly because they're somewhat same. But over a 10-year period, business and NGOs rose. What happened in the period between May of last year and January of this year is trust in business imploded in China, went down 25 points. I attribute that to maybe business overreaching. The Jack Ma issue about the Ant Financial listing, also the fraud at the coffee company Luckin. And people were just really disappointed. So the gap between business and government trust in China was government on top, business 20 plus points below, as opposed to, just 6 months before when business was within 5 points of government. Big change.
Yeah. When you look at China-U.S. relations today as a company that is invested and committed in China, clearly on the political side, there's strong rhetoric that's taken place. How concerned are you about the state of the relationship, and how critical is it that we find common ground between China and the U.S.?
Let me start about business, David, and then get to the government. I'm really concerned because trust in brand China in the US and in Europe is really at a low ebb. So if you're a Chinese brand, Bank of China, whoever, you're carrying a 25-pound sack on your back when you're running the race. It's trust in the 20s. And that has trended down as the relation between the two countries has really, frankly, deteriorated substantially. And the issues surrounding Huawei, the accusations about TikTok and data security. So it's not good. And so I'm really concerned because I know that China has a big ambition for its companies to go global. The tech seems to be the battleground, the Alibaba, Amazon, whatever. And the inability of American companies historically to get what they say is fair treatment in China, but this is changing. So for example, Goldman Sachs is really opening up in a big way in China to try and do wealth management. So I think we need Chinese companies to explain that they're not part of the government, that they in fact do have appropriate governance, that they do care about sustainability, that they do care about their workers. I mean, there have been programs on public broadcasting in the US showing a Chinese company taking over glass making facilities in Ohio and how hard they were on the workers and things like this. It gets around. So I think China has a big PR problem in the US, no question.
Where does that change need to happen? Is that a top-down CEO decision? I mean, and what advice do you give those CEOs who are dealing in the US at a time as we see so much challenge and headwinds against them? So I think that Chinese companies need to have best-in-class governance, best-in-class sustainability, best-in-class supply chain, including diverse.
best in class diverse workforces, that the management must be a mix of Chinese and Americans. And it needs to be a priority for who's ever running the business to be externally focused, not just internal and making money. Because again, this has to be done on a brand by brand basis as opposed to the country. So why is South Korea's reputation improved? Because of Samsung. And Samsung has learned this lesson of, playing in a bigger world.
How important is it for those companies and brands as well to not only look at business, but be deeply engaged in the communities they serve? And where the U.S. has always been, those companies have been thought of as a leader in being community-oriented philanthropic work. Is that a critical part of building both trust, but also confidence and relationships?
So I think this is one of these that swings as a pendulum. And we're now at a part of the pendulum swing where, again, government disabled, high belief in business is competent and ethical, their trust in my employer, and the employees all want companies to speak up on the issues of the day. So, and the issues are, David, very much related to pandemic stress syndrome, including mental health and retraining for jobs that might be replaced by machines, and downward mobility and systemic racism. And so it's a big order book, but I do think every company should make its big impact in local market where it's headquartered. So if a Chinese company has a big manufacturing facility in Alabama, help take on education, help take on access to healthcare. If poor people have a 3-to-1 worse outcome on COVID than wealthier people, help fix that problem.
When you look at brands that are in the forefront from a CEO point of view, a marketing point of view, in good times, many times in challenging times, CEOs retrench, cut back on that messaging, become a little more inward. You've been through the highs and lows and seen so much. How important is it for CEOs to almost be over communicating and be out there more during the tough times? And is it well understood that those are the times when branding and communication matter most?
Well, I'll just use an example of myself. During the darkest hours of COVID, and everybody was locked down in their apartments, we did a trust barometer version every month on, the pandemic and return to workplace and fear of vaccination. And I partnered with Dr. David Nabarro from the WHO and talked to my team about, not working beyond 6 or 6:30 and about spending time with the kids and, just over communicating. And I think Jamie Dimon is a perfect example of recognizing and changing that he was the ultimate hard-nosed capitalist. And he, over the last decade, adopting Detroit, for instance, and putting up $200 million in that struggling city to help finance the comeback, I think has paid off so big time for JP Morgan.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the shifting in how we communicate with social media, with digital, for CEOs as they build brands in new markets, as Chinese leaders try to build brand within the US, is it a multi-pronged approach of how you get that message out? And what do you tell them about the most effective ways to communicate and to reach that audience?
So, David, I would say it's sort of multi-pronged. The first is you're not going to do it through advertising. That the number of people who've signed off of cable, who are just on Netflix, is very high. So I would really emphasize influencers, people who have big YouTube followings, TikTok followings, go young and take that chance. The second, don't do advertising because it's too expensive. The second point is do inside out, win over your employees, have them tell stories about how well they're being treated, and win there. The third is I would really overemphasize e-commerce because you don't need to build bricks and mortar. And again, the best e-commerce brands, Warby Parker, people like this, have great stories about giving back or entrepreneurship and things like this.
What are you hearing from CEOs, especially in New York and major cities, around the future of work and what the new normal will look like? And from your vantage point in leading a large organization like Edelman, how are you looking at the future of work?
So it's going to be a blended kind of approach, meaning 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, a more communal workspace. No one will have his or her own space, except for me, because I'm going to come in every day. But because I'm a horse. But the more important thing is you have to make sure that government creates a playing field that is more or less equal across the company. It's like, what do we do with an unvaccinated person? What do we do about public safety on the subways? What do we do about the expectation of traveling to clients? You know, all of this is playbook to be written, and we have to keep our talent. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we're passing along the culture, that we're, passing along our expertise to the next gen. And I think that a lot comes from in-person contact.
Well, there was a time, Richard, not that long ago, when many people equated brand with the CEO. CEO and brand were one.
Yes.
As some CEOs got in trouble and became too big for the brand, that seemed to have shifted. Where are we today on that? And for you, how important is it for the CEO to be linked with brand? How do you find that balance of not being the brand, but clearly being aligned with the brand?
So entrepreneurs are inherently linked to the brand. Steve Jobs or Kevin Plank at Under Armour, founders. And so that's one group. Mr. Greenberg, AIG, they're exceptional. Then there are professional managers who follow them, and they have a different set of facts. And I think that the brand has to be able to stand on its own 2 feet at some point, and that the brand should have multiple messengers, not a solo act. It's too risky. It's, what happened to Apple after Steve Jobs was they had a very professional guy, Tim Cook, who started to take on LGBT issues or access to washrooms or, protect my customers' privacy. All of those were damn smart and made him a worthy successor.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned TikTok earlier, who you've done work with. When you look at crisis management and you look at that situation, can you talk a little about more with your knowledge, that situation and kind of a little bit of a case study of what came out of that?
So as all of you will remember, a year ago, Kevin Mayer was appointed the big boss of TikTok, and there was talk of a spinoff of that from ByteDance. And then the Trump administration was going to ban TikTok on the basis of data flowing to China on American consumers so that they could, program youngsters. And so what I learned about it is, number one, that stories on Chinese companies or Chinese-owned companies don't originate in the US. They originate in China, based in the bureaus in Beijing or Shanghai. So it has to be at least a 2-city exercise. The second is there is a really strong gap, between the public affairs, political side and the actual business. I mean, TikTok kept its data in Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And the kind of distortion that happened because of politics just had its own life. And it became, after Kung Flu, the next thing was going after TikTok just to demonize China. And it had real legs, and it had more legs, David, in local markets in Texas and Florida, which were battleground states. So I guess my point to all the people on the call is don't assume because you've got media in Washington and New York that everything is okay, because the national media has bureaus in Texas and Florida, number one, and number two, they have big local newspapers. And so you have to fight this in local as well as national.
You also mentioned some other. Can you talk a little bit or touch on some other maybe interesting for this audience case studies or areas where you really think lessons can be learned in some of those other relationships that had either with Chinese companies or had that focus?
So David, a good example is United Airlines 3 years ago when the Asian passenger was removed from the flight to Louisville from Chicago because they had to put a pilot on the plane and he refused to go, and they had to call the police, and he got a bit bloody, and then somebody took a YouTube video and put it up, and the company's first reaction for the first day was, look, we had to reaccommodate him. And then there was a boycott that was started in China starting that Sunday night. The incident happened on Sunday, but it happened literally within hours, and the outrage. And so, and by the next day, United had apologized, had changed its policy on reaccommodation and all this, and said it would never have a policeman on the plane again. But every crisis is a global crisis. That's what I learned from that one. And you've really got not 24 hours, you have 4 hours in which to, this is what happened, this is where we're going, and this is the change that we're going to make. Because otherwise the whole story is the bloody guy and the pictures on TV. I think another one that is, I think, interesting to the audience is sourcing in Xinjiang. And textile companies are caught between the Chinese and the US. The cotton in Xinjiang province is fantastic, and it's where the Uyghurs live, and there were accusations of slave labor and of, so a lot of the American companies pulled out of manufacturing, but they were still sourcing some cotton from there. And then the pressure came from the Biden administration saying you should stop doing that. And the NGO said, you're supporting repression of the Uyghurs. And then some American companies signed on to a petition of the NGOs saying, China, you're being bad to the Uyghurs. And then the Chinese went nuts and said, you like selling your Calvin Klein suits in our country? That's nice. We're taking you off of all electric commerce. Have a nice day, e-commerce. And so, then the question becomes, are you going to aggravate the US? Are you going to aggravate China? Try to avoid that. So what's in between? Well, you might aggravate the NGOs, okay, because you're not going to be so advocating their position about getting out of all purchase of cotton in Xinjiang. But beyond that, whether or not you're manufacturing or buying cotton there, don't pile on with NGOs onto China. That's just, putting a match into gasoline. And so you have to find a way between the two powers.
You mentioned, Richard, earlier, Edelman having 300 people in China. For you, was it important, you touched on diversity. Was it important as you built out the team in China that it was local talent and you were able to find those within China? Did you have to find that mix you touched on? What was the key ingredient to making sure you had the right people?
So it really started out with expats. If I go back to the early 90s, we had a French, couple of Americans, who were the bosses. And over time, we have developed Chinese leadership, and some of it's from training overseas and coming back. Some of it is just buying people with talent in the market. But there's no way that expats can have the feel for the market that native Chinese do, and so the trick becomes, David, the extent to which you can do training outside of home market.
Mm-hmm. How do you, though, maintain culture? I mean, there are those today, even with Edelman size, that refer to it as a family feel, family culture.
Yeah.
In the early days, clearly that was easier than it is today. You have culture, you have different geographies, such a diverse workforce. How do you keep culture in the forefront and make sure that doesn't get lost?
Look, some of it is personal diplomacy and going on airplanes and doing that. You know, there's that's the nature of the family business. But I think also the values of the firm, and again, communicating with people frequently during COVID and giving them quality information and sending them gift baskets and sending them things that showed you're paying attention. But more importantly, for example, David, on a call today, you know, we presented our new trust findings to the employees, and I had 5 minutes at the end, and I didn't use it on the substance of the study. I talked about the one key finding in that study, which said the new big issue is mental health. And I want each of you to stop working every day between 6 and 6:30 p.m., spend time with your husband or wife, your kids, your dog, go for a run. I do not want you to think of this life as a sprint. It's a marathon. And if you're not well, you're not going to be good in your job. And, you know, I've lived through mental health issues. My mom, you know, had manic depression, and I understand the problem. So anyway, it's really important that leaders express that kind of humanity.
When you look at those CEOs who are on this call today, you touched on a big aspect. Is that well understood today, how employee health, employee well-being really drives the business? It's not a health issue, it's also a business issue, and affects the bottom line, and the need to really invest in those type of programs and to provide those type of resources for your people?
I think it's undervalued. I think it's not really appreciated, the extent of the crisis. And I think that the impact of COVID is not a one-year impact. It's a multi-year that, you know, if you're an employee and your kids are teens and they're damaged from this is not a 1 month, 1 year even fix. And you as an employer have to be sensitive to this and give the employee the time and space to fix it.
You also know well what that next generation of top talent is looking for, the type of companies they want to join. Can you talk about that shift as well, as you look at young people today, and really it not just being about a paycheck, but about much more from a societal point of view?
I find it fascinating that Unilever's moved from number 100 to number 3 most desired place to work. And that's because they set up a thing called the Sustainable Living Plan 10 years ago, and they promised to double revenue and increase consumption of resource zero. And, you know, no more plastic bottles, you know, these sorts of things. And so, I mean, look, Facebook, Google, they're deeply attractive because you can make more money and because, you know, they have a lot of customers. So it's partly the success thing and the tech thing, but it's also partly the decency level of the company. And is the company committed to big changes?
Yeah. What do you see with the vast number of CEOs you work with, you counsel? What do you see as the real traits for effective leadership? And are there certain characteristics in those CEOs who you feel are getting it right, that you see consistent and common throughout?
I think they are increasingly playing beyond the numbers, that they are strategic, that they're consistent, but they are also humane, not just human, but humane, and that they are somehow pushing the company, like Kevin Johnson of Starbucks. Idea, take the straws out of the cups. The operator's like, what are you talking about? No, take the straws out of the cups. Save hundreds of millions of straws that otherwise wind up on the beaches or in the water. And so I would just urge on each of you also, when you have a crisis, to do an all hands on convening and talk about it. So again, Starbucks a couple of years ago had an incident in Philadelphia where a couple of African-American kids were waiting in the store for somebody, and the store manager said, if you're not buying product, you got to leave. And they said, well, we're going to sit down here shortly. And one guy said, well, I'd like to go to the bathroom. And the guy said, well, then you're out of here. I'm getting, and the guy said, no. And then cops came. It was bad. But then Starbucks closed its operation for half a day to talk about how to treat customers.
Mhm.
That's taking something seriously. That was really important for the country too.
Yeah, yeah. There are many who look to recovery and rebuilding in New York, and there are a number of those on this call who are leading operations with New York headquarters in the U.S. What is your outlook for New York? And for those who say New York will never be the same, you're somebody who is a New Yorker through and through. What are the keys to New York's recovery, rebuilding, and really future success?
The first is the return to the workplace, because so much of the wealth here is tied to real estate. Second is providing a safe and secure environment in which people can come back to work, public safety. Third is we have to get the entertainment and restaurant business back up, because it's 500,000 jobs, David, tied to this sector. And it's the fun part of being here. It makes worthwhile all the traffic and noise and everything else if you can go to Broadway and see Hamilton. And so all of these moving pieces, but I really hope the city agrees on a September 1 reopening and then points to that so that those who've now moved away to the Hamptons or Florida can come back.
Yeah. How important is it, though, for a lot of these issues to be addressed from a public-private partnership point of view? I mean, you touched on trust. It's with business today, but can business do it alone? I mean, how critical is it that be a close and effective relationship?
So I think that the relation between the city and private enterprise has really been challenged the last 6 or 7 years, contrasted to the Bloomberg administration when it was really tight. And so I would hope that whoever is the next mayor recognizes that business is key to the success of the city, and whether it's return of tourism or investing in new jobs here in tech. So look, I differentiate between political and social issues. I think on the political side are things that are foundational: infrastructure, education, healthcare, security. Those are not for business. Business can have an opinion and advise government. Now, meanwhile, where can business dominate? Well, retraining, wage levels, the workplace and workplace safety. So again, both of us have things to accomplish, but the together parts are like a Venn diagram, the overlap of the circles.
For someone who is the leader in communications and messaging, we've come out of a time of the phrase fake news, and we have cable TV that, depending what channel you on, it could be the same issue, but you could be living in two entirely different universes. How do we bridge that gap, and how do we bring truth back when you look at the polarization and the divide that's here?
The tragedy of the last decade is that there's been a good return on investment of extreme views in media. In other words, Fox versus MSNBC, for instance. And so when Tucker Carlson speaks to his 2 or 3 million followers, it's good money for Fox. And so the necessity of coming back to the middle to have an agreed set of facts could not be more urgent. And I would absolutely tell all of you on the call, every one of your companies should consider itself a media source. Now, what do I mean by this? The most trusted source of information today is my employer's magazine or newsletter, more than mainstream media, because mainstream media has made clicks off of views that are controversial and that people pile onto. So centrist media like your own or Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal is urgent, but there's a supplemental role for, for instance, about vaccination. Where is it available? what about the side effects for heart attack patients? Or what about idea of getting pregnant or something? It should 35-year-old girls now or ladies not get shots? All of these have to be dealt with. Mainstream media also has an economics problem of reduced number of journalists. So again, I think there is a role for a company to play a supplemental informational role.
What is the role to being successful when you look at a CEO's and the company's constituency? There are those CEOs who say, focus on the customer. There are others who say, keep shareholders happy. There are others who say it starts with the employees, that moves the others. How do you look at those three when it comes to priority, and where do you think CEOs should start? Is it employee first? Is it customer first? Is it shareholder first?
Our data, David, shows very clearly that the new expectation is that the number one stakeholder is my employee. And the reason is that, particularly in tech, or your programmers are all your competitive advantage. And so, and employees have put a lot of trust in my employer. My employer CEO is 15, 20 points higher than a normal CEO in terms of trust. And so I really feel like it's a quite special responsibility to lead that enterprise. And getting quality facts to people is among the most important things you can do. And then also listening to them and letting them have their say on issues of race and diversity or green issues. Because the millennial values are really becoming the establishment values. The older folks are really getting their lead from the 28-year-olds.
Yeah. And before I open it up, and I know there'll be some other questions, there are many on this call who are hiring young people, but there are many who have young children, those who are entering the workforce. Those young people today who look, and over the past year, the world has turned upside down in so many different areas, so many different crises. You're an optimistic person by nature and look for the opportunity. But what advice do you tell those people who might be in their careers now looking for a change or coming out of school? What should they be doing to find the right opportunity, to be fulfilled, and to really succeed in this very uncertain world?
I would say that as a young person, you have a better chance of impact by far than I did when I came into my company 40 years ago, even though I went to work for my dad. The reality is no one listened to young people, David. When we were coming up, we were supposed to, do what we were told. And now you really have the ability to ask for almost the unfathomable and go and get it, because you have tech, because you have a public voice through social, because you have companies that want to do good, really want to do good.
Yeah. I think it would be very valuable. I see we have some questions here. I don't know if you want to take the lead. I'm happy to go through that. But I think it'd be great if we let some others either ask questions or I can read them, whatever you recommend.
Yes, David, you sound, your mic is a little bit tricky now. Do you want to try again?
Yeah. If you want, you can hear me. I'm looking at some of these questions. You think we should ask those who wrote them to ask? You want me to read them? What would be best?
Yeah, you can just go ahead. We can start from the first one, question about Chinese tourism.
So Richard, there's a question for those working in Chinese tourism. We anticipate that China will be relaxing flight restrictions in an effort to revitalize China's status as a worldwide destination, with trust in brand China being at its point now. How would you recommend airlines in similar countries build back trust?
So I think China has an opportunity to lead the world in establishing a safe travel protocol. That it's not just getting on the flight, it's also what's expected in the restaurants, what's expected on the buses, what's expected in the airport transit, and that, in fact, there is a safe way to travel. And particularly maybe starting with business people who need to go, as opposed to tourists who might choose to go to Canada or some other place that's close that they can get back from. And I would really emphasize not just having the hotels speak, but have a Chinese version of Dr. Fauci or someone like this. And I might even have a global expert who establishes the protocol.
You also mentioned, Richard, earlier with China-U.S. relations, U.S. companies and U.S. CEOs might feel not the same level playing field in China they've experienced as those might experience here. There was a question about, from your vantage point as a CEO running a business with a large presence in China, what has your experience been, and what are your feelings about the opportunities in China for U.S. CEOs and that playing field?
I think that there have been sectors such as tech and automotive where it's been difficult. And there have been IP issues and whatever. Let's be candid about this. But this is China 2021. This is not China 2010. And China has to explain how it's changed, how it's opened up, how it now will fiercely protect IP. And it needs to, in a certain way, say it's China 3.0. And come on, like Goldman Sachs story again of now going into the market in financial services in a big way. And we need to tell success stories of Chinese success or of American companies' success in China.
You mentioned your work with the
David, we have all the issue here you clearly, so I will just go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Hi, Mr. Edelman. So here's another question from our audience. They would like to learn more about your experience running a business in China and how did you bridge culture difference and position Edelman to be successful there?
So, look, it's been a long journey. We've gone from a $1 million company to about a $25 million company. We have competitors who are larger than us. For example, Blue Focus, which is probably 5 times our size. It's a Chinese company. I don't think we've done it perfectly. We've made acquisitions. We've hired in senior team members. The story of culture is difficult because there's a lot of turnover of talent, because a young person in China who gets an opportunity to make $3,000 more goes. And I understand, but we're invested in training people who come overseas. We're invested in all of the idea of China. I want China to be our second or third biggest market within 5 years, to pass the UK. So that means they have to triple in size. So they have a big assignment.
Cool, thank you so much. And another one from our audience. Can you please share your thoughts about how do Chinese companies in the US take advantage of the setting of next normal despite this current political scene?
Please explain the question one more time.
So basically, our audience would like to learn how can the Chinese companies here operating in the United States can take advantage of the setting of next normal?
Well, I went to see Kai-Fu Lee's internet lab in Beijing, and what an exciting place with 200 entrepreneurs, each writing code for, literally you could go and say, I want, a hamburger and French fries or something, and it magically appears. Just, because through AI, they sort of can anticipate orders or things. We need to bring the Chinese future to the US and show that in fact it can improve lives here. that in fact Chinese tech is not evil and stealing your data, that it's actually very useful in retail or in finance. My God, the ability to do things cardlessly is impressive just on your phone.
Thank you. And here comes another one. How can Chinese companies better position themselves with U.S. public officials given the current state of affairs?
Well, I don't think that American public officials are going to do much of seeing Chinese officials in the next little while, or Chinese business people either. I think you better get Americans who work for you to go see the American officials, because I don't think any American politician wants to be seen with the Chinese. I think it's bad PR for them. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, but it's, I mean, do you know that the week after Trump's party lost the election, like in February, they were already running anti-China ads in Florida and Texas. It's difficult right now.
Thank you. And also one asking about how to deal with unfavorable views of China if such views are based on facts. Also, some policy recommending that US boycott the Olympics. So basically that's two questions here.
Well, if the facts are bad, meaning if in fact on sustainability or intellectual property protection, then I think the Chinese companies have to be seen as pushing their government to fix the problems. And otherwise it's hopeless. As for the Olympics, I think the Americans will not boycott the Olympics. I think that would be an overreaction to the situation. I predict it won't happen. And it would be a good idea if in places like Minnesota and Utah and Michigan and like where there are hockey players or skiers or like this, that there be education of the legislators to make sure that, yeah, there's pressure on the administration not to be crazy.
Thank you. I think we have a couple of more minutes here. David, do you have any other questions?
I think, I think Richard, it's just, I think from your point in kind of summing up, I think if you were to talk to CEOs about really the steps to take to be effective in communication and branding and getting your message out, especially in a market, as you did at the beginning when you went to China, those who are here now. Are there steps to take? Is it not to get ahead of yourself, to build it the right way so that you really have brand kind of extension and brand loyalty?
What I would do if I was a Chinese company trying to compete in the US is I would do my basic business well, but then I would look for products or services that help solve the important problems of America, which are education, fairness, health, sustainability. And so if, for instance, there were Chinese software that somehow was improving distance education, remote education, or could provide tutoring for poor kids, and some of the equipment could be donated to the poor families, it would make a hell of a big difference. And similarly, on health, if China somehow has AI that's predictive of incidence of cancer or other things, apply it in poor communities because they just don't have enough access to doctors.
But Richard, as you mentioned with government officials, if you're a Chinese business leader today in the US and you look at the climate, is this a time where you would give advice to stay under the radar and be quiet? Or is this the time, if you're doing some of those positive things, you look at
that through the pandemic, there were Chinese companies in the U.S. who were addressing food insecurity and who were doing other issues that really made a difference. Should you tell that message when you're in this climate, or is it counterproductive?
This is not going to pass in any quick manner, this tension. So if I were you, if I were BYD making electric batteries that help in Los Angeles, or school buses or whatever, I would tell that story like crazy, because the aspect of reputation and trust is determined by ability, dependability, integrity, and purpose. And what's happened is ability is only 25% of it now. The other three are 75. So you want to be seen as high integrity, high purpose people, tell those stories. You're not going to benefit from silence.
And while you clearly have a vantage point in this, can you tell those stories with an in-house team? What is the value of reaching out, not just to an Edelman, but do you need or should you be looking to find that extension that understands you to tell that story for you, who are experts? How do you recommend which makes sense?
I think that an in-house team is useful as an interpreter between the Chinese side and American. But in terms of public communications, my experience is largely that you should use agency to do the connecting to media or delivery on the execution side. I haven't seen large Chinese PR departments work effectively globally. Too much bias from China experience, and too much oriented to social and digital relative to here. We're more or less, you have to fight it out with the mainstream media.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I think from our point, that covers a lot of things. Sherry, any further thoughts?
Great. It's about the time, but we have like 2 more questions in the Q&A. Shall we go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for the flexibility. So this one is about the Chinese students. With regards to Chinese students trying to pursue advanced education in U.S., are they equally treated in terms of admission?
Well, they were until COVID, and I don't think so now. And I hope that that will pass, maybe not for this year, for this college year, but for the year after. I think one of the great bindings is in academic institutions. I went to Harvard, and I was lucky enough to have John Fairbanks talk to me about Asia studies, and he'd been American ambassador in China. And, that kind of thing, and having Chinese students in the class where we can bond, it was amazing. So not this year, though. Sorry, it's a bias.
Okay, so I think we still have time for one last question. Due to the rising negative attitude to China between both of the parties, is it possible that trade amount decreased dramatically and resulting in detached economy between the 2 countries?
I think that's possible, but I hope that American companies and Chinese companies are smart enough to avoid that. I mean, of course we can insource. Of course, both of us have big consumer economies, but we have a lot to learn from each other, and we have to get people back to believing in free trade and believing in fair trade. And I think the Chinese government reputation here has to change, has to be seen as demanding protection of IP and of good treatment of workers. Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
I think that's great.
Thank you so much. This is
Of course.
such a wonderful conversation, and I only wish we can have a longer program for everyone. And we definitely want to invite you back again soon. So CGCC is an independent, non-partisan, non-governmental chamber of commerce. We provide a broad range of programs, services, and resources to over 1,000 multinational corporate members. We encourage you to visit our website, follow us on social media, and subscribe to our daily newsletter to stay connected with us. Our next coming up event is on the screen now. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the day and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody.